Sounds like we are live. Welcome, Zach.
Hey, Glenn. Thanks for having me.
Yeah, absolutely. We're excited about sharing what will be the first, I'm sure, of many of these types of discussions. We've got a number of folks attending and registered for this. I think we've got folks from retail, we've got folks from e-commerce, staffing agencies, just about everybody. So it should be an exciting conversation. Let's start with some quick introductions. Zach, let me give you the floor to introduce yourself.
Thanks, Glenn. I'm Zach Napolitano, founder at the TAC Group. At the TAC Group, we work with emerging mid-market brands all the way through Fortune 500 brands to provide practical solutions to improve their distribution and fulfillment operations, relying on our decades of industry experience.
Fantastic. And I am Glynn LoPresti, one of the co-founders, CEO here at Takt. At Takt, we, really the people outside here, build the world's best labor management and warehouse performance system. We are entirely focused on improvement, cost reduction, frontline employee engagement, and support retailers, e-commerce companies of all sizes, up to including Fortune 500 companies. And our other primary customer base is third-party logistics, and again, support operations with a single operation all the way up to 50 to 100 plus facilities across their network. But we are not here today to talk about TAC Group or Takt, which would be a challenge in and of itself, just because our names are so similar. We're here because Zach was actually, we were chatting recently. Zach was providing some suggestions, some feedback on our product roadmap, and started talking about his war stories and lessons learned and best practices for peak season. And I said, hey, Zach, I think there's probably a lot of folks in the industry that would benefit from this dialogue. Would you be willing to jump on and talk to us about it? And so that's how we have found ourselves here today. Now, Zach talks about playbooks a lot. When he talks about peak season, he consistently uses the word playbook. And so I thought, what a great way to construct this conversation today. Our goal is to really provide some concrete lessons learned, guidance, and a lot of that is going to come from Zach. So if you'll give me the next slide here, we will. We've structured today's conversation where we can spend a few minutes talking through some of the plays that Zach has shared, planning like a pro, building out your bench and preparing for peak season, executing in real time, coaching and communicating from the floor, and then inevitably, how do you deal with when things go sideways and ultimately apply those learnings, not only to peak next year, but intraday peak this year, as well as all of your operations. And so that's what we're going to do. We'll move through these, and I'll keep us moving here. But let's jump right into play number one, which is the planning process here. Zach, what do you got?
All right, Glenn. Play one. So it all starts with the planning process for peak. And really, when you think about peak, whenever I hear that word, immediately, like the first thing that comes to my mind is resources. And that was from my days back at FedEx. I had a director who, every peak planning meeting we had, he would say, those who win peak have the most resources. Right? It's not just about having the most resources, but it's about having the right amount of resources and the resources in the right places. So as you plan your resources, right, you're looking at your volume expectations. It's really a math equation, right, Glenn? It's how do we, here's our projected volume based off of forecast. Now, how do we align our resources to meet that demand? Then it becomes, you can use your platforms. So you have to understand, like, what are your outputs? What's your productivity by function? And get your total hours, right? Your volume divided by your productivity equals your hours needed to meet that demand. And that's why it's so critical for companies to measure and understand, like, what is the output they get by position, by function, so that you can arrive at a somewhat accurate resource plan for peak. That's how I approach it, Glenn. Right, and understanding, like, the peak planning process looks a little bit different for everybody based on industry. I know at FedEx, my 20 plus years there, we started talking about peak on January 1st, right? Like, we planned for that all year long. And really, we started in earnest in July and August to start to ramp up our resources to meet demand. Now as I work with clients, some start that process in August and September, and others are just starting it now, right? Because everybody's window is a little bit different, and your ramp up period looks a little bit different. But ultimately, what you're trying to understand and plan to is how many people are you going to need to meet that expected output.
What are you seeing in terms of the use of overtime, adding shifts, which I imagine have a potential to create some burnout, temp labor, seasonal labor, or is that really industry specific or individual organization specific?
Yeah, that should all be part of your planning process. And I don't think it is industry specific, Ron. I think it's across industries. Those are your other things that you need to account for. Is you can add people, right? You can you need the hours, right? But it's how are you going to get those hours? So do you add people? Do you add shifts? Or do you add overtime? How do you stretch out your workforce to meet the demand? So you can add shifts. You can incorporate overtime. You can bring in temp labor or seasonal or flex staffing, right? Or a combination of all of those things as you go through the process. I think, recently I was working with a client that they were talking about adding shifts. And then as we started to approach that conversation, we started talking about the leadership that you need, right, to add a shift. And just for some reason that wasn't on their radar, right? So they had planned to add a shift all along. And as you start to think about who's going to lead that extra shift, right, they didn't have the resources to do that. So just make sure that you're going through your checklist as you are planning. And if you're planning to add a shift or weekend shifts or a second shift, right, they have the necessary leadership to accomplish that.
Yep, got it. And I imagine that even with the best of intentions, sometimes your temp agencies or your additional staff, sometimes fail to come through on a given day. So I imagine a lot of this is about planning for not just the volume you expect, but for the how you're going to react, right, when those things happen.
Exactly.
Yeah. Okay. Wonderful. All right. Well, we'll shift. I think an easy shift from the planning side is into the tactical part of that, which is, all right, now you've got a plan for where you're going to get your labor, but that, I guess what we call play number two is how are you going to build that bench, right? It's there's more to it than just reaching out and hiring a temp agency. A lot with onboarding and things like that. I've heard you regale us with. So any guidance, suggestions on building out that bench once you've identified the resources that you need?
Yeah, this is now you get into the fun stuff, Glenn, where you're actually starting to add people and work towards that execution component. But I think what's really important through this process, and really is probably something you should have in place year round, but becomes even more critical during peak periods, is having a really streamlined and effective onboarding process. And when I say that, right, it is what does that onboarding process look like for your new resources? Understand how many people you can onboard each week effectively so that they understand what the expectations are, right? The work that they're going to be doing. They have a chance to meet the people that they're going to be led by and working alongside. So they truly understand what good looks like for them before they hit the floor. One mistake a lot of people make getting into peak is you're rushing to get mass numbers in, but you're not doing it effectively. It's a very rushed process, and if it seems rushed to you, it's going to feel really rushed for those people that you're bringing on board, and it just doesn't create a great employee experience. And those are the people that we generally see turnover quickly.
Yep. I mean, I imagine that, onboarding, obviously there's the operational side of onboarding, but I imagine there's also a lot of alignment that has to take place with the HR teams as well. And then beyond that, what do you suggest or what do you see as best practice in terms of mentoring on new or seasonal employees that you're hoping to get up and running in days, not weeks? Is it a mentor program? What do you generally see or suggest?
Yeah, I think there's a couple of effective strategies there, Glenn, that I've seen work over the years. Number one, make sure that they understand who their leader is, who's their supervisor or lead that they're going to be working alongside, working for, and reporting to. And then trying to be consistent with how you allocate those resources and those people. It's easy to kind of move people to where the work is, but make sure that you're doing that in a way where people are, like, you're communicating effectively with people. I try to minimize that movement as much as possible, right? And again, if we tie it back to the planning piece where you know where you need those people, and you're putting them in that position, and really minimizing the movement across functions. But to me, that is so important, because now you're allowing people to get comfortable in a role and become more productive, and now your resource requirements, right, are you're more aligned to what your planning was because you're getting the output that you anticipated.
Got it. Yeah, I think and I've heard you mention, again, the playbook is one of the ones that came when it came to onboarding. I think I'll use your quote, which is a 2-hour onboarding checklist beats a 2-week learning curve where you're spending a third or a half of peak season just trying to truly complete the onboarding process.
Yeah, exactly, Glenn.
Yeah. Okay. Great. I know we're talking a lot about planning here, and admittedly, some of the things that we're talking about, you've mentioned in many cases start months ago. So maybe we move into some of the real exciting stuff, which is, okay, peak season is here. Let's talk about what we'll call play number 3, which is execution in real time, right? And so, when it comes to this the situation where you now have additional hours, additional capacity, whether it's new shifts, whether it's seasonal workers, and how do you prevent that from becoming a free for all?
Well, I think we talked about it a little bit in the previous play of being consistent with how you allocate resources in the positions that you put them in. Right. It's now you're allowing people to get comfortable and become proficient in a function is probably step number 1. Step number 2 is just as you're going, peak's all about execution, right? Like your job is to understand what your requirements are, how many resources you need. Now you get them in place. Hopefully you've onboarded correctly, and now it's how do we get these people and how do we get our teams to execute effectively in the moment? Now that conditions are probably more hectic than what your team is used to, your year-round team. So things like stand-up meetings, right? The daily stand-up meeting, making sure that you have your talking points every day. You're going over yesterday's results, but also reviewing kind of what the expectations are for the day. Getting alignment with the team prior to shift startup is step 1. And then I'm a huge fan, Glenn, of as you come back midday, right? Obviously, you're always making adjustments kind of throughout the shift. If you have, you're looking at your WMS, your LMS, your systems to understand how is the day going, how are we tracking to plan. And then you're making adjustments. You're moving people where the work is, but there's usually very few people who understand and of what moves are being made and why, right? That's your leadership team. But the people on the floor, right, that are being moved and are probably in a situation now that is a little bit more uncomfortable to them than what they're used to. I check in, post break or post lunch, just a 5 minute, like all sort or by team, right, department. Like you just need to get your people together and say, hey, here's where we're at now. Here are some of the moves we made, and here's what's left for the day. And just review that with them. I think that check-in and really quick communication point with your teams allows everybody to be on the same page. Now people understand, again, like we talked about it in the morning, things have changed since then. Where do we stand currently, right? And hey, am I going to be working overtime today? Do you need more out of me? Have we been moving slower than pace? Have we gone faster than the projected pace? And that checkpoint is just like, it's reassuring for people. And I found that to be very, very effective. And I think the teams that are intentional about doing that and consistent with that approach see better results through that second half of the day. Particularly if you're going to be working overtime, you're like, allow people to make some adjustments and have that communication. Peak is all about when you bring people on, you want to keep those people. Part of that, the executional component of it is like, it's maintaining the resources that you've brought on.
Yep.
So how do you best manage that? And again, to me, it's the communication and check-ins and recalibrations are super important. But then communicating that all the way down the line is like, tends to be the missing piece.
Yeah. Yeah, I think, you bring up a good point. A lot of what you talked about is intraday moves, adjustments in real time. And we hear a lot about, and it's a very important part of executing, whether it's during peak season or whether it's driving improvement, is having access to that intraday or real time data. We always like to say you can't coach yesterday's game, right? And so if you are going to, be at risk of missing a goal, or you're going to be, you need to make some moves, right? The ability to look at or be able to draw upon that data, whether it's coming from your WMS or a labor management warehouse performance system, like the ability to be able to draw on that data in real time. And even better, right? The folks out on the floor, you mentioned it, they're spread thin, right? This is peak season is a particularly aggressive time for a leadership team that's spread thin. And so they can't spend their day in spreadsheets. They can't spend their days looking for that information. And so the more that you can, and I think this is a, sort of a vision that we have and something we lean into, is how do you push that information out so that people don't have to spend their days? It kind of finds them, right? Because they need to be out on the floor during this critical time. And the improvement doesn't come from reports tomorrow or reports at the end of the season or anything like that. The actual improvement and execution, right, against goals is coming in real time, and the adjustments that you have to make throughout the day. So no, I think that's great. I think any other words of advice there, or war stories from what happens during the inevitable chaos that ensues during peak season in execution?
Glenn, how much time do we have? There's everybody has them. Like you never execute flawlessly, right? That's always the goal. But to do that day after day, like hour after hour, it is so challenging in these environments because there's so many variables, right? So I think, again, to tie it back to the data piece, which I think is so critical, because not everybody, right? But your core team has to know like where you are throughout the day, and being able to quickly look at those real-time data points helps you stay calibrated, right? And it allows you to make those moves. So, I work with clients that don't have the systems, and it's so much harder for them to anticipate, the necessary moves and to go execute those, because they lag. They're lagging in the data. So, or you have to have somebody positioned, in a spot where they can accumulate that data and try to make decisions in somewhat real time. And I think that's a huge challenge for them that they need to overcome. So having those data points and that system that's going to show you that quickly, it just allows you to be more nimble, which during peak is really sometimes the difference between kind of winning and losing the day.
Okay. Listen, hey, obviously, we certainly appreciate that that tip in there. I think it's a great way to segue into, okay, you've got information and it's coming in real time, but this is something near and dear to our heart is you got to communicate that, right? And so I know that one of the plays that you suggested was, leading and coaching from the floor. And so, again, you've got a number of people, you've got leadership trying to manage a much larger group. You can't be everywhere at once, but you've got to communicate that. And so, where do you see that and what changes, if any, do you suggest when it comes to communicating, right, setting expectations during peak season or year round?
Yeah, we talked about pre-shift meetings, Glenn. We've talked about the check-ins in the middle of the shift. One thing we haven't talked about is talking to your associates throughout the day. It's that coaching in the moment that is for your veterans and for your new folks that is really important. It's what helps them improve and drive performance, and allows you to stay on track. I'm sure you have some things that you'd like to talk about here, but again, like being able to coach a person in the moment with data, right, data points, or being able to, you have to be on the floor, you have to be present during peak, more so than ever because of the increased resources. And then being able to identify, a behavior that's not correct and quickly coach in that moment, right? Like that is so impactful. And don't miss out on those opportunities to have those conversations and quickly realign.
Yeah, absolutely. Look, this is absolutely one of those things that we see as absolutely paramount to driving improvement, but even more so the engagement, right? It is setting the expectations, communicating those expectations. I think peak season presents a challenge because it's one of those times where, your supervisors have to be the coaches out on the floor. And if you're digging through a ton of data to try and figure out who you needed to talk to or where to spend your time, your coaching conversations are going to fall off a cliff, right? I mean, we had one of our clients say that their leaders were spending more time just trying to figure out who to coach than actually having coaching conversations. And I can tell you that even from a data perspective, there is absolutely no question, and we certainly have the data to prove that improvement is going to come from the front line. It doesn't come from management. It doesn't come from leadership. Planning can only go so far. And so it is those conversations, those effective conversations where you can set expectations, tell people where there are rooms for opportunity. You can team them up or make moves as necessary, but providing that feedback in the moment, I think, is absolutely critical if the goal is to actually drive improvement. And I think that works two ways as well. I think, one of the things that we don't see a lot of is the 360 feedback, right? There's a lot of coaching tends to be leadership and supervisors to the front line, but to us, the front line they're the eyes and ears on the floor. They're the first people that know, I'm not idle right now. I'm out of work. My machine is broken. There's a safety issue. Never mind just the general feedback in a time when burnout and additional responsibilities are being placed on people. It's important to listen to the front line. I think we always, it's so funny to us that the typical way to approach feedback from the floor is in many cases pulse surveys that you do twice a year. And I think, from our perspective, every person out on the floor, or the vast majority of them, are carrying around an RF device, which is, for all intents and purposes, an Android phone. And so it's one of the things that we added, which was, hey, give the front line the ability to say, hey, here's how I'm doing. Did I have a great shift today? What are my suggestions? you can do that at any point in time. There's no need to wait, 6 months to get a pulse survey from the front line. And so, I think certainly something that we lean into a lot, and it's good to hear your thoughts on it as well, because coaching and engagement of the front line is so critical throughout the year, but I think particularly during peak season. Great.
Yeah, and I love that. I love that tool, Glenn, to be able to provide feedback from the associate level. Right, that's been a missing link for so long. So making it easy to do that is fantastic.
That was a funny one. That was just a client of ours that said, "Hey, those 5 happy face, sad face circles in the airport bathrooms? Like, couldn't we just ask our team anytime they want to tell us how they're feeling?" Now, there's more than that you can do, but it was sort of a light bulb moment, and I think it's certainly served us very well and the customers that we serve. All right. Let's get into the next play, which is an important one. Hey, stuff's going to go sideways. It's not if it goes sideways, it's when it goes sideways. What have you done? What do you coach, folks on when inevitably things go sideways, particularly in a peak season?
Yeah, you're right, Glenn. It's not if, it's when something will go wrong, right? You think about peak, it's your highest volume time. All your systems are stressed. If you're running, any type of automation, right? That's probably never seen that volume before. So you're talking about from a material handling standpoint, we've seen systems get slowed, right? If you had the AWS situation that just happened during peak season, or if you're losing hours of production in a time where you're really trying to take advantage of every single hour that you have to meet that demand, how your ability to recover becomes so important. And really, like, what we coach is, it's contingency planning and it's scenario planning, and it's thinking about all the things that can go wrong, right? And then saying, okay, if the sorter goes down for 2 hours, how do we make up, right? What do we do within those 2 hours so we can still be productive, right, and still move volume? But then do we have the spare parts, right? To get away from, talking about resources, it's not just people, it's also equipment, right? And it's having, as you go through that contingency planning, now you're asking yourself all of these questions. Do we have the spare parts that we need? Do we what are our system backups? What are where's our redundancy? And making sure that you don't have a single point of failure.
Sorry,
yeah.
Go ahead.
No, go ahead, Glenn.
Oh, I was going to ask, take what I assume is a more common than not type of thing that happens during peak season. You've planned, you've onboarded, but all of a sudden, unexpectedly, one day in peak, your volume jumps 4x unexpectedly, right? And if you're not careful, that's going to be a problem that you're going to end up chasing in perpetuity. So in the moment, what type of approach or suggestion do you have when, the operations team is sitting around at the end of the day and saying, wow, that caught us off guard. How do we make sure that we're not chasing this for the rest of peak season?
Yeah, I think it's how well you've gone through that contingency planning, Glenn, right? So that something is going to go wrong. So if you've planned for a sorter to go down, you've already talked through, how are we going to continue to move boxes through our building without our sorter? All right. Do you have accordion rollers? Are you going to do an assembly line type thing? Like, somehow you need to minimize the impact, right? Knowing that you're probably not going to maintain the productivity that you would with that equipment. And then it's like, okay, we've debriefed. It happened. We debrief. How do we handle that situation? What could we have done better? Right. And how was our planning for that event? Did it go as expected? Because I think when you're sitting in a room and you're doing the contingency planning, you're anticipating these failures, but you're not fully anticipating all of the variables within that, right? How's your leadership going to react? How are your people going to react to that? And how quickly can you overcome the obstacle? But then you start to think, okay, well, we need to make up the production. So can we get more people in here? What are our options to add staffing? To increase overtime or shift length, work a weekend. If you're already working 24/7, like I know a lot of people are during peak, right? Now you need to add overtime. You have to add people, and having good relationships with staffing agencies and contingency labor. That's now all the time and effort you've put into developing those relationships, hopefully is going to bear some fruit. You'll be able to get the people that you need to overcome. Yeah. Because you're right, you can't catch up, right? If you're already stretched to the max, like those are the only options that you have.
Yeah. Yeah, actually, a quick shout out to one of our partners. We just announced a partnership with InstaWork, which is bringing obviously gig work or on demand work, right? Which is making its way into operations as well. So I think from a contingency planning situation, a perfect example of where some of these new approaches may make their way in and solve very specific problems like you're talking about as well. So. Very exciting. All right. You kind of alluded to it when it came to like the debriefing. Something went wrong. There are things that you have to do that you can't wait and prep for next year. There are things that need to be done, start planning tomorrow to get caught up. But let's move to sort of the last play here, which is, okay, right? We've gone through this. How do we take the learnings from this year? How do we take the things that we learned and how do we apply them not only to next peak season so that we have a more comprehensive playbook? We've seen more things. We know what worked. We know what didn't work. We know what triggered certain things. How do we now best apply those learnings throughout the year and prepare for future peak seasons?
Yeah, this is like I'm most passionate about this topic, Glenn, because I'm going through so many peak seasons. At FedEx, at Ahold, you learn so much. Like not only every year, but like literally, like you're learning every shift. So I'm a huge fan of what I call a peak playbook, and that is like a living, breathing document. I literally had a 3-ring binder that I had, which I know seems a little bit old school, but my thought process behind having the 3-ring binder was like, I'm never in the same job for 18 months. Right. And so when I leave, this knowledge can't come with me. The knowledge needs to stay in the building where, that the next leader has to know like what we've done before, why we've done it, how it's, how did it work? Right. So like, that's why I talk about like a physical document, because you should leave that behind. But using that playbook to capture, forecasted volume, what was the actual versus the forecast for day by day, customer by customer. If you're a 3PL, hey, we used the staffing model. And we decided to add shifts. Like, did that work? Did it work the way we wanted it to? Do we want to pivot from that? And I think being able to just make notes and document that throughout the peak season, right, allows you to, and it shouldn't be a retrospective after peak, right? It should literally be something that you take 15 to 20 minutes a day updating and journaling what has occurred and how did you react? If things went sideways, we had one of the situations that we just talked about, right? What was the outcome, right? And what would you do differently next time? But document that in the moment. Don't try to do it 3 months later when you've already forgotten, a lot of the events that happened. And then to take it one step further, not only should the leader be keeping a playbook, like everybody on your team should be keeping a playbook. And we used to bring our playbooks into our staff meetings, and we would spend time reviewing everybody's playbook. Because everybody's learning something, right? And somebody might have had an observation or a takeaway that the rest of the team didn't fully understand, like kind of the impact of a situation. So we all learn from that collectively, and then we take that into as we go post peak and start our planning process again the following year. We can easily look back on really, really concrete and real time observations and better plan for the next peak. Like peak is such a learning activity, right? Like I always think of my career as like how many peaks did I go through and how many new buildings did I open? Because each of those experiences is like so much development and learning condensed in such a short period of time.
Yeah.
So you want to maximize your takeaways from that. Like utilize this opportunity to really learn about your operation and your people, but then carry that information and that knowledge forward and make good adjustments so that you're constantly improving.
Perfect. Yeah, I think we like to say peak season is sort of a stress test for the operation, right? It's a great opportunity to identify the gaps in the operation, the strengths and the resilience of the operation. And I'll go one further than your 3-ring binder. Now, I am a notebook guy to the dismay of the vast majority, if not all of my team, who are all far more technology savvy than I. However, I think the data part plays a huge benefit in this as well, right? Beyond just the handwritten notes and things like that, the ability to go back and see in the data what happened in real time. And I'll give you a great example of something that wasn't something we anticipated. One of our customers, a large retailer, when we first started with them, said, we keep coming back year after year and hiring seasonal labor that was problematic the year before, right? We just keep hiring the same people because we have absolutely no ability to go back and say, what do we know about these people? What do we know where their strengths are and things like that? And so literally over the course of 1 year, they went from doing it that way to not only leveraging the historical data that they had access to identify who to potentially avoid bringing back, but also, when mid-January comes around and the seasonal labor that they brought on board is rolling off, they actually use the skills matrix, or what we call the baseball card that gets created on every operator, every employee that's out on the floor. They use that to guide hiring decisions and personnel changes moving into the year. I think it's a great example, and just one small example of the benefit of having not just the notebook, but the data retrospective to be able to go back and look at these things. So no.
Yeah, that's a great call, Glenn. I like that one. And then, look, I think we could spend 45 minutes. We could spend a webinar on peak playbooks. You just learn so much during peak. Like you said, it's the ultimate stress test for your operation. Yeah. I would say one thing I didn't call out that I think is important is don't wait until the next peak to apply the lessons that you've learned. Yeah. You should do that as soon as you can. Right. So if you find that your standards were not dialed in, right, or not, like. When's the last time that you did engineer labor, to the time studies and updated your standards, right? It might be an opportunity post-peak. If your resource planning was way off, like take a look at why, right? And make those adjustments. That's one example of many.
Great. Yeah. All right. Well, listen, I want to make sure we leave a couple of minutes for Q&A here. But ultimately, hopefully, we don't have to pull the slide back up with the playbook here, the 6 plays. Let's see what questions are coming in from the group here. So I'll read them out here. Zach, you may not be able to see them. First question that came in: what do you consider the ideal structure for a startup meeting during peak season that managers should follow? And are there particular metrics that you should emphasize in these meetings?
Yeah, great question. I do think that having a structure is important. I think what that structure is depends on what your operation is and what your culture is. Because I think the KPI should be your core kind of people, service, cost metrics that you talk about year round. But then obviously you want to incorporate workload in there, right? So what's yesterday's results, and then today's volume or orders that you have in front of you. And it's a great opportunity to recognize the team as well for their efforts, right? And I think that should be part of that day to day, whether that's team recognition or individual recognition, allocating 60 to 90 seconds of that stand up meeting to really recognize the team or the people that have gone above and beyond. Yep. Is important.
Yeah, great. Yeah, I think we've got there's a number of folks that we work with that set goals, right, and reviewing those goals. Where were we yesterday? I mean, But again, this is a situation where if you do have access to the data to say, how did we do on our goal yesterday? What was that affected by? Was it, is it a utilization issue? Is it an efficiency issue from yesterday that's going to identify areas for either training or contingency planning for those opportunities moving forward? Got it. We've got another question here. How should operations teams think about incentive plans during peak season?
We get this question all the time, Glenn. This is my opinion is if you have an incentive program in place, then keep it as is through peak. I don't think peak is the time that you want to make changes to a program because it becomes one more thing to manage. And really one more thing that could potentially go wrong. So, if you want to incentivize teams, I focus less on the performance piece during peak and more around like who's showing up to work and attendance, right? So if you show up for all of your shifts for the week, then you can get entered in a raffle to win. We've seen Yetis, TVs, like whatever you want that prize to be, but reward attendance and encourage people to show up to work.
I think that's exactly what we hear as well. I mean, we work with a lot of folks that want to either implement, modify, an incentive plan, and during peak season, though, we consistently hear and recognize the need to focus on the attendance aspect is probably the biggest thing, and any attempt to try and roll out a comprehensive incentive plan during peak season, runs the risk of either running awry of the existing team if you already have one in place, or potentially just taking your eye off the ball of arguably the most important thing that could go wrong, which is no shows, temp agencies, or extra shifts where people are calling in, that type of thing, where the very core metric for success, which is making sure you have adequate productivity, falls apart. And so, I think it aligns perfectly with what we say. We've got one more question, but if you have any more, please, if you're on the call right now, feel free to put any additional questions into the Zoom Q&A. Let's see here. What is the best way for warehouse support teams, industrial engineers, to support the operations both before and during peak season?
That's a great question. I think before peak, it's supporting the planning process, right, and making sure the numbers are accurate, so that your planning is on track, right, and aligned with the actual performance of the building to ensure that you're getting the right staffing levels in there. I think that's the best way to support pre-peak. During peak, I think a lot of the project-based work tends to, be put on hold during peak. So, how can you support the floor in other ways? Can you go and help coach people? There's so much knowledge within the support personnel being on the floor to kind of see what's happening in those very stressful times. And being able to kind of make recommendations and also learn from that so that you can, again, add that into your peak playbook, their peak playbooks in order to make those adjustments, post peak or even during peak if it's urgent. But I think that's like the name implies where they should be. They should be supporting the operation, be on the floor, be visible, and find a way to help those ops teams that are super stressed, both mentally and physically during those times.
Great. I know we're at time. We got time for one more question if you do. When you sit down to review peak season with leadership, what are the 2 to 3 things that you focus on, whether that's coming out of your binder or whatever, but a retrospective or an intra-peak season review with leadership? What are the things that you focus on?
There's 3 things that I'm always focused on. It's people, it's service, and when you're running those operations, it's your cost. So I think as you have those whether it's a retrospective or kind of during peak, you have KPIs for a reason, right? They help align you to your goals and your values. So how are we doing in relation to those goals, and why, right? Do we meet our targets or do we miss our targets? But I don't think you stray from that during peak, because peak is just more volume, right? Your operation becomes a little more chaotic during peak. There's a lot more emphasis and urgency during those times, but you shouldn't change who you are, right? I think if anything, like you should really lean into kind of who you are and what you want to accomplish the other 10 months out of the year. And hopefully like that allows you to flourish during peak. But again, people, service, cost, like those are what you should always be focused on, in my opinion.
Awesome. Well, let's, I know we're a little over here, but let me, on behalf of Zach and myself, thank everyone that joined today for their time. We certainly appreciate you giving us the opportunity to share some of this, and thank you to Zach for sharing some of the stories from the front line, if you will. If anyone that is on the call today would like to learn more about these strategies or how they can apply in your operation, Zach and I would love to connect with you offline. Please don't hesitate to reach out. We certainly appreciate your time and hope everybody has a great day and a great peak season.